Have a sweet nightmares. The whole ordeal happened in a small town in Pennsylvania, an unassuming place called Lancaster. The town was nestled amidst rolling hills, forged by centuries of geological upheaval and calmed by the soothing hands of time. The buildings were mostly old, built in the early 19th century, their brick facades weathered but warm, their wooden structures creaking with tales of yesteryears. The town's heart was its school, Lancaster High School, a colossal structure whose every brick seemed to echo the ambition and dreams of countless generations of students. I was the school's janitor, a man often overlooked but one who knew every nook and cranny of the school. The hallways were my kingdom, the classrooms my subjects, and the school's secrets, my treasure. In the morning, the school was a cacophony of voices, laughter, and slamming lockers. By evening, the school descended into an eerie silence, as if catching its breath after a long day. The silence was only broken by the soft hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional creaks of the old wooden floorboards. One winter evening, as the last rays of the sun were swallowed by the impending darkness, the school was put under lockdown. At first I thought it was a drill, a routine exercise to test the preparedness of the school, but then I saw the fear in the eyes of Mrs. Patterson, the vice principal, and I knew it was not a drill. She had herded the few remaining students into classrooms, directing them with an air of calm urgency. The school was plunged into an unnatural silence, the kind that made your gut churn. I could hear my heart thumping against my ribcage, its rhythm erratic and urgent. The intercom crackled to life, and the principal's voice echoed through the hallways. "Stay in your rooms, lockdown is in effect." The words seemed to hang in the air, their weight tangible and ominous. My job was to secure the entrances, a task I had done countless times, but never under such circumstances. As I moved through the deserted hallways, the school seemed to take on a different persona. The benign murals on the walls seemed to leer at me, the shadows seemed to dance with a macabre glee, and the silence seemed to whisper untold horrors. I had just finished securing the main entrance when I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible sound, like the rustling of leaves in a gentle breeze. But indoors, I turned around, my heart pounding in my chest. There was a figure standing at the far end of the hallway. It was hard to make out its features, but it was tall, its silhouette menacing. Panic surged through me and my instincts screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. The figure started moving towards me, its movement slow and deliberate. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion, but amidst the chaos, an idea took root. I remembered the old utility closet at the end of the hallway, a small, forgotten space that could serve as a hiding spot. I forced my legs to move, my mind focused on reaching the closet. I could hear the figure behind me, its footsteps echoing in the empty hallway, growing louder with each passing moment. I reached the closet, slipped inside, and carefully pulled the door shut, plunging myself into darkness. My breathing was ragged. My heart threatened to burst out of my chest, but I forced myself to stay quiet. I could hear the footsteps outside. They stopped for a moment and then continued, growing fainter until they were swallowed by the silence. After what felt like an eternity, the intercom crackled to life again. The lockdown was lifted. The police had arrived, but they found no trace of the intruder. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The ordeal was over, but the memory of that night still lingers. The school, once a symbol of hope and dreams, now seemed to harbor unseen terrors. But life had to go on. The hallways were once again filled with laughter and chatter. The classrooms buzzed with energy. But beneath the normalcy, a cold fear lurked. A fear of the unknown, a fear of the darkness that sometimes hides in the most familiar places. I remember the day clear as crystal. It was a typical autumn afternoon in the small town of Binghamton, New York. I was a teacher at the local high school, a tired, gray building that had been around since the 1950s. It was situated on a quiet street, lined with lazy, drooping willows. On that fateful day, the sky was overcast, a light drizzle painting the cracked sidewalks a darker shade of gray. The bell for the end of the day was about to ring when the intercom crackled to life. Our principal's shaky voice echoed through the classrooms. "This is not a drill. We are going into lockdown. Please follow protocol." My heart pounded in my chest, my senses on high alert. The students stared at me, fear mirrored in their wide eyes. I rushed to lock the classroom door. A quiet hush fell over the room as I pulled the blinds and switched off the lights. I told my students to huddle quietly in the corner, away from the door and windows. I could hear their nervous breathing, punctuated by the occasional whimper. The hallways outside were dead silent. It was eerie, like we had suddenly become the last people on Earth. I was straining my ears, trying to catch any sound that might explain what was happening. Then, a soft, barely audible tapping sound echoed from the hallway. It was slow and deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. My heart seemed to beat in sync with the rhythm. I signaled for my students to remain quiet, my eyes darting around the room. The tapping grew louder and closer. It stopped just outside our classroom door. An instinctual shiver ran through me as I held my breath. The door handle twitched, then turned, but the door remained locked. A guttural growl echoed from the other side of the door, followed by a loud banging. The students whimpered, some silently crying. I quietly moved towards the door, keeping my eyes on the handle. The banging continued, growing more frenzied with each passing second. Suddenly, everything went silent again. The silence was more terrifying than the banging. The unknown of what might happen next was gnawing at my sanity. I waited for what seemed like an eternity, but there was no sound. No movement. Just as I was about to signal the students, the intercom crackled again. The principal's voice, filled with relief, announced, "The lockdown is over. The police have apprehended the intruder. Everyone is safe." There was a collective sigh of relief in the classroom. I unlocked the door and switched on the lights. The students slowly got up, some hugging each other, some crying. The relief was palpable, but the terror was etched on their faces, a reminder of the horrifying ordeal. Later I learned that a deranged man had broken into the school. He was armed and had intended to cause harm. The tapping we heard was him testing the doors, looking for unlocked ones. The thought sent chills down my heart. Had our door been unlocked? I didn't want to think about it. That day we were the lucky ones. We followed the protocol and it saved us. It was a chilling reminder that horror doesn't always lurk in the shadows of the night. Sometimes it walks into your life in broad daylight on a quiet street in a small town like Binghamton. And when it does, all you can do is hold your breath, stay silent, and hope for the best. I've spent the better part of my life in the city of Boston, Massachusetts. It's exactly what you'd expect from a bustling metropolis, skyscrapers stretching out to the blue expanse. The Charles River lazily winding its way through the city. The hum of traffic that never seems to die down, and people, lots of them, each with their own story to tell. But the heart of my story lies in the unassuming town of Brookline, just a stone's throw away from the city. Nestled amidst the tree-lined streets of Brookline is the Pierce School, a massive red brick structure that, despite its size, blends seamlessly into its surroundings. The school is a labyrinth of corridors, classrooms, and stairways. It's the kind of place that's easy to get lost in, especially if you're new, but not for me. I'm Mike, the school guidance counselor. I've spent countless hours walking these halls, talking to students, helping them navigate through their problems. It was a typical Friday. The air was filled with that unique blend of exhaustion from the week gone by and anticipation for the weekend ahead. The clock in my office showed 10:35 a.m., just before the third period. I was in the middle of a counseling session when the announcement came in, crackling over the intercom.
"Lockdown in effect. This is not a drill."
My blood froze. Lockdown drills were standard, but this wasn't one of them. The voice was that of Mrs. Mathewson, our school principal. I knew her well enough to catch the edge of real fear in her voice. I ushered the student in my office into the corner, away from the door and windows, and locked the door. My heart pounded in my chest like a jackhammer. Minutes felt like hours. The silence was oppressive, heavy, broken only by the occasional distant siren. I checked my phone, hoping for information, but there was none. It was like the world outside had ceased to exist. Suddenly the silence was shattered by the deafening sound of gunshots echoing through the corridors. I felt the blood drain from my face. I fought the urge to vomit. The grim reality of our situation dawned on me. We had an active shooter in the school. The school erupted into chaos. More gunshots, screams, the shrill ringing of the fire alarm. I could hear the terrified whispers of the student with me. I hushed him, my eyes glued to the small glass panel on the door. And then I saw him, a figure in a hoodie clutching what looked like a rifle, a student of Pierce School, a child turned monster. Cold dread washed over me. He was just a few doors away from my office. I didn't have time for fear. I had to act. I texted 911, giving them a description of the shooter and his location. I then sent a group message to the teachers, warning them to stay in their classrooms. When the police finally arrived, it felt like an eternity had passed. We could hear the shouts, the gunshots, the blaring sirens. Then all at once it was eerily quiet. They found the shooter in the chemistry lab, unconscious. He had shot himself with a tranquilizer he found there, but not before he had terrorized the school, injuring 15 people. When we were finally allowed to leave, I emerged from my office to a scene of devastation. The once familiar corridors were a war zone. Blood smeared on the walls, papers strewn all over, bullet holes marking the lockers. It was a sight I'd never forget. But despite the horror, there was a sense of relief, of survival. Everyone had made it. The injured were in the hospital, but they were alive. The shooter was in custody. We were safe. The next few days were a blur of interviews, counseling sessions, and sleepless nights. But through it all, there was a sense of unity, of a community coming together in the face of adversity. I'm still here, still in Pierce School. The memories of that day are etched deep, a stark reminder of the fragility of life. But we've moved on, stronger and more resilient. Life, as it always does, goes on. I was just another student in the sprawling metropolis of Phoenix, Arizona, studying at the aging, somewhat dilapidated structure known as Westwood High School. It was an old building with its red brick facade worn and faded from years of relentless desert sun. The school was an intricate maze of dimly lit hallways and classrooms, a labyrinth of knowledge and teenage angst. The classrooms always smelled of chalk and eraser dust, of old textbooks and new sneakers. It wasn't extraordinary in any sense, just another urban school with its fair share of teachers who had seen better days and students who craved the freedom of graduation. That day started like any other. The usual hustle-bustle in the morning, the chatter of students, the faint smell of coffee wafting from the teacher's lounge. Everything was as it always was, or so it seemed. Our physics teacher, Mr. Richards, was a quiet man. He was recently divorced, a fact he never shared but which we all knew. It was a small school after all. Secrets had a way of getting out. That day, however, something was off about him. His usual calm demeanor was replaced with a nervous twitch, and his pale face seemed to have lost even more color. He was always a bit of an oddball, but this was different. As the day wore on, I noticed Mr. Richards becoming more and more agitated. He'd snap at students for minor infractions, his voice echoing eerily in the silent classroom. During our lunch break, I saw him pacing in the corridor, mumbling to himself. It was odd, but no one thought much of it at the time. The real horror began after lunch. We were in the middle of a physics lecture when the intercom crackled to life. "Lockdown. This is not a drill. Lockdown immediately." The words were spoken in a calm, steady voice, but they sent a jolt of fear through everyone in the room. A moment of stunned silence was followed by the screeching of chairs as everyone scrambled to barricade the door with desks and bookcases. We turned off the lights and huddled in the furthest corner, our hearts pounding in our chests. The school was eerily silent for what felt like an eternity. Then we heard the gunshots. Muffled, but unmistakable. Panic set in, but we stayed quiet, praying fervently to be spared. Through the window, we saw police cars swarming the school. Sirens wailed in the distance, and the occasional crackle of the police radio was the only sound that broke the oppressive silence. The lockdown seemed to last forever. With every passing minute, the fear and tension in the room grew. We didn't know what was happening outside, only that we were trapped in our classroom, waiting for the nightmare to end. We later learned that Mr. Richards had gone on a shooting spree. He had shot 2 students who had once bullied him mercilessly. Then he wounded several teachers in the staff room. The once quiet and unassuming man had turned into a monster, driven mad by his personal tragedies. The climax of this horrifying ordeal came when we heard a single gunshot, much closer than the others. It was quickly followed by an eerie silence that seemed to consume the entire school. Moments later, the police burst into our room, their guns drawn, their faces pale and tense. Mr. Richards had killed himself in the classroom next door. The man who had once taught us about the laws of physics had defied the most crucial law of humanity, taking lives and then his own. The horror of that day will forever be etched in my memory. It was a chilling reminder of how quickly a seemingly normal day can turn into a nightmare, how the people we think we know can become strangers, and how life, as we know it, can change in an instant. Alright guys, that's it for today's video. Remember, these were just fictional stories about school lockdowns designed to entertain and thrill you. In the unlikely event of a real school attack, always listen to your teachers and school officials, follow their instructions, and stay calm. If you have enjoyed these hair-raising tales, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share your thoughts in the comments section. Your engagement and feedback are what keep me going and help me create more spine-chilling content for you. Don't stop here, guys. There are loads more terrifying stories waiting for you right here on this channel. So drop whatever you're doing and dive right in. Remember, fear is only as deep as the mind allows.